Story number 1. The Curse of Black Pine. I never paid much heed to the old legends that the Native American tribes of Montana whispered about around their fires. Growing up in Helena, surrounded by modern conveniences and the bustling life of a small city, stories of restless spirits and cursed forests seemed like nothing more than quaint folklore meant to entertain children and perhaps keep them from wandering too far into the wilderness. But that belief was irrevocably shattered the winter I decided to move my family to the remote outskirts of Black Pine Forest. My name is David Harper, and I work as a marketing executive for a mid-sized firm. My wife, Laura, and our 2 children, Emily and Jack, have always longed for a simpler life away from the chaos of the city. When the opportunity arose to purchase a modest cabin nestled on the edge of Black Pine Forest, we seized it without a second thought. The allure of fresh air, sprawling landscapes, and the promise of tranquility was too enticing to pass up. Black Pine Forest was a vast expanse of towering pines, their dark silhouettes etched against the winter sky. The locals spoke little of the area, their interactions with outsiders minimal and cautious. When we first arrived, the cabin was exactly as advertised, rustic, cozy, and surrounded by untouched snow that sparkled under the pale winter sun. We settled in quickly, eager to embrace our new life. The first few weeks were idyllic. We spent our days exploring the forest trails, teaching Emily and Jack to sled, and enjoying the simple pleasures of cabin life. Laura took to gardening, tending to the small greenhouse she had set up, while I immersed myself in woodworking, crafting furniture from the abundant timber around us. The nights were spent by the fireplace, sharing stories and savoring the warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting cold outside. But as the days turned into weeks and the nights grew longer, an undercurrent of unease began to seep into our lives. It started subtly, faint whispers carried by the wind, barely audible over the howling storms that swept through the region. We dismissed them as the natural sounds of the forest, the rustling of branches and the shifting of snow. However, there was something about those whispers that felt different, more deliberate, as if the forest itself was trying to communicate with us. One particularly harsh winter evening, Laura suggested we bring in a large pine tree from the forest to use as our Christmas tree. The idea seemed practical and aesthetically pleasing, a way to incorporate the natural beauty of our surroundings into our home. I agreed, despite the unease that had been gnawing at me. "It'll be perfect," I told her, trying to mask my discomfort. The next morning, we ventured deeper into the forest than usual, the snow crunching under our boots as we searched for the perfect tree. After hours of searching, we found it, a majestic pine, its branches heavy with pristine snow, standing proudly amidst the otherwise barren landscape. Ignoring the faint warning signs etched into the bark, scratches and symbols that hinted at something ancient and foreboding, we began to cut the tree down. As the axe met wood, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence oppressive in its intensity. Laura and I exchanged uneasy glances, but the practicality of having a Christmas tree overpowered our growing apprehension. We dragged the massive tree back to the cabin, the weight of our actions pressing down on us like the heavy snow around us. That night, as we decorated the tree with ornaments and lights, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, threading through the crackling of the fire and the creaking of the old wood. Emily and Jack laughed, chasing each other around the living room, unaware of the darkness that lurked just beyond the windows. As midnight approached, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a chorus of anguished spirits. We sat around the fireplace, the warmth of the flames doing little to dispel the chill that had settled over us. Suddenly, Laura froze, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw something," she whispered, clutching Emily close. "A shadow moving outside, right by the tree." My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the window, the flashlight in my hand trembling. Peering out into the storm, I saw nothing but swirling snow and the dark outline of the forest. "It's probably just a branch or something," I reassured her, though my voice lacked conviction. But the whispers grew louder, merging with the howling wind into a cacophony of sorrow and rage. The air in the cabin grew colder, the shadows deeper and more menacing. I felt an invisible presence pressing against the walls, an oppressive force that made it difficult to breathe. "We need to leave the tree alone," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's not just a tree." Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the cabin, the sound of the tree outside being violently uprooted from the snow. The windows rattled as a gust of wind slammed against them, the storm's fury unleashing its full force upon us. The whispers turned into anguished cries, the voices of the lost echoing through the night. Panicked, I grabbed Laura and the children, urging them to move towards the back door. But as we reached the entrance, the door swung shut of its own accord, the lock clicking ominously. "Stay calm," I tried to reassure them, but fear gnawed at my insides. The temperature plummeted further, our breaths visible in the frigid air as the voices grew louder, more desperate. Desperate to escape, I looked around for another way out, my mind racing for a solution. The living room seemed to twist and warp, the shadows taking on grotesque shapes that danced and flickered with malevolent intent. "We have to get out," I shouted, pulling Laura and the children towards the fireplace. But as we moved, the floor beneath us began to tremble, the house itself shaking violently as if caught in a relentless assault. The tree outside, once a symbol of our hope and holiday spirit, now stood as a grotesque monument to our folly, its branches clawing at the sky like the fingers of a tormented soul. Suddenly, the house convulsed, the walls buckling and the roof caving in under the weight of the storm. I felt a searing pain as debris rained down around us, the cabin collapsing into a chaotic mess of wood and ice. The screams of the lost echoed in my ears as darkness enveloped me, the last thing I saw being the ghostly green light emanating from the tree, its presence a haunting reminder of the curse we had awakened. When I awoke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene, untouched landscape. My body was bruised and battered, the remnants of the cabin scattered around me. Dazed and disoriented, I stumbled to my feet, calling out for Laura and the children. But there was no response, only the silent expanse of the forest and the ghostly green glow from the tree. Days passed in a blur of confusion and fear as I searched for my family, the footprints leading away from the cabin into the depths of black pine forest. Each step deeper into the wilderness seemed to erase their presence, the snow swallowing up any trace of our existence. The whispers still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the curse that had claimed my loved ones. One night, driven by desperation and a need for closure, I returned to the site where the cabin once stood. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the gentle rustling of the trees and the soft whisper of the wind. The tree, now seemingly untouched by time, stood tall and imposing, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against the dark sky. As I approached, the whispers began anew, their sorrowful voices weaving through the stillness of the night. The air grew colder, the green light from the tree intensifying, casting long shadows that danced menacingly across the snow. I felt a presence, an invisible force pressing against me, urging me to leave and never return. But the fear that had consumed me for weeks now transformed into a burning determination. "I won't let this curse define me," I whispered, my voice steady despite the terror that gripped me. I reached out, placing my hand on the tree's rough bark, feeling an immediate surge of energy that pulsed through my body. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and the snow erupted in a blinding flash of light. The whispers reached a crescendo, the voices of the lost intertwining with my own desperate pleas for salvation. I felt myself being pulled into the tree, the green light enveloping me in its spectral embrace. When the light faded, I found myself standing in a vast, ethereal landscape, the snow-covered forest stretching endlessly before me. Ghostly apparitions roamed the land, their hollow eyes fixed upon me with sorrow and longing. Among them, I saw Laura and the children, their forms shimmering with an otherworldly glow, forever bound to the curse of Black Pine Forest. "Teddy," Laura called out, her voice echoing through the spectral realm. "You shouldn't have come here." Tears streamed down my face as I reached out to embrace them, but the distance between us remained insurmountable. The curse had claimed them, trapping their souls in an eternal winter, their existence a haunting reminder of the folly of ignoring ancient warnings. Realizing the extent of the curse, I understood that I was now a part of this spectral landscape, forever wandering the cursed forest alongside my family, bound by the very legend I had once dismissed. The whispers of the lost surrounded me, their voices a constant lullaby of sorrow and regret, echoing through the endless snow. Years have passed since that tragic winter, but the memory of Frostwood Hollow remains a haunting presence in my mind, a ghostly reminder of the thin veil between belief and skepticism, caution and curiosity. The name Black Pine Forest now carries a weight of tragedy and loss, a constant warning to those who dare to challenge the legends that guard their eternal vigil. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote wilderness of Montana, heed my warning, respect the legends, listen to the whispers carried by the wind, and remember that some curses are too powerful to escape. For in the heart of Black Pine Forest lies a sorrowful legacy, forever binding those who dare to disturb its haunted grounds, leaving nothing but shadows and whispers in their wake. Story number 2. The Haunting of Frostmore Castle. I never believed in curses or ghost stories. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, surrounded by the relentless pace of city life, tales of haunted places in rural Maine seemed like nothing more than exaggerated stories meant to entertain tourists and keep children from straying too far. But that belief was irrevocably shattered the winter I decided to investigate the legend of Frostmore Castle. My name is Michael Thompson, and as a journalist for a local Chicago newspaper, I prided myself on uncovering the truth behind the stories that others dismissed as mere folklore. When I first heard about Frostmore Castle, a grand snow castle built by the wealthy Theodore Frost in 1902, I was intrigued. Theodore had constructed it as a winter retreat for his family, nestled deep within the remote forests of Maine. The castle was a marvel of its time, with intricate ice sculptures, grand halls, and sweeping views of the snow-covered landscape. But tragedy struck in the winter of 1910. A brutal blizzard swept through the region, trapping Theodore and his family inside the castle. Supplies dwindled, and despite their wealth, they were unable to escape the relentless storm. When rescue parties finally arrived months later, all that remained were the frozen remains of the Frost family, their lifeless bodies preserved by the unforgiving cold. The castle itself was abandoned, left to succumb to the elements and the passage of time. Decades passed, and Frostmore Castle became the stuff of local legend. Locals whispered about seeing a faint green light emanating from the ruins during snowstorms, accompanied by eerie sounds and ghostly apparitions. Some claimed to have heard the mournful cries of the Frost family, forever trapped in their icy prison. These stories fascinated me, igniting a curiosity that I couldn't ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the history of Frostmore Castle. I pored over old newspapers, interviewed descendants of the Frost family, and spoke with locals who had grown up hearing the tales. The more I learned, the more I became convinced that there was more to the story than mere tragedy. There were hints of unresolved sorrow, perhaps even supernatural elements that bound the spirits of the Frost family to their eternal winter abode. Armed with my findings, I decided to visit Frostmore Castle during the peak of winter. I knew the journey would be treacherous, with the harsh Alaskan-like winters of Maine posing significant challenges, but the allure of uncovering a forgotten story was too strong to resist. I assembled a small team of trusted colleagues: Sarah, a fellow journalist with a knack for technology, Jake, a seasoned outdoorsman and survival expert, and Emily, a photographer eager to capture any evidence of the supernatural. We set out in early December, our convoy of rugged vehicles making its way through miles of dense forest blanketed in pristine snow. The journey was arduous, the biting cold seeping into our bones as we navigated the winding roads that led to the remote location of Frostmore Castle. As we approached the site, the landscape opened up to reveal the remnants of the once grand snow castle, now a shadow of its former glory. The structure was battered by years of storms, its intricate designs worn away by relentless winds and heavy snowfall. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional howl of a distant wolf or the soft whisper of the wind through the pines. We set up our equipment at the edge of the clearing, preparing for what lay ahead. The castle stood ominously before us, its grand halls and towering walls now mere echoes of the past. Despite its dilapidated state, there was an undeniable presence that seemed to emanate from within its icy walls. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the first snowflakes began to fall, adding a fresh layer to the already snow-covered landscape. We decided to camp just outside the castle, using it as our base of operations. The plan was to spend the night, documenting any unusual activity and capturing footage that could shed light on the legends surrounding Frostmore Castle. We gathered around a small fire, the flames flickering against the darkness as we shared stories and theories about what we might encounter. Sarah set up her recording equipment, Jake organized our gear, and Emily prepared her camera, eager to capture any signs of the supernatural. I sat quietly, my mind racing with anticipation and a growing sense of unease. Around midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The wind picked up, howling through the trees with an intensity that made the fire flicker and dance. It was then that we heard it, a soft, rhythmic knocking coming from the direction of the castle. At first, we dismissed it as the sound of branches tapping against the structure, but the knocking grew louder and more deliberate, echoing through the stillness of the night. "Did you guys hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide with apprehension. Jake nodded, his expression tense. "Yeah, sounds like it's coming from the castle." Determined to investigate, we grabbed our flashlights and cautiously approached the entrance of Frostmoor Castle. The knocking persisted, now accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to emanate from within the icy walls. As we stood before the grand entrance, a sense of dread washed over me, the legends of restless spirits and tragic loss becoming all too real. "We need to get inside," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped us all. "We might find something important." Reluctantly, I agreed. We pushed open the heavy door, which creaked ominously as it gave way to reveal the grand foyer of the castle. The interior was bathed in an eerie green light, the source of which was difficult to pinpoint. The air was frigid, the cold biting into our skin as we stepped further inside, our footsteps echoing through the vast, empty halls. Sarah began recording, her equipment capturing the strange phenomena that surrounded us. Emily snapped photos, her camera capturing fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures moving in the corners of her vision. Jake led the way, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger, while I trailed behind, trying to piece together the puzzle of what had happened here so many years ago. As we ventured deeper into the castle, the knocking intensified, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing and soft, mournful crying. We entered what appeared to be the main living area, the remnants of a once opulent space now reduced to decaying furniture and shattered glass. It was here that we found it, a handwritten letter laid out on a dusty table, its ink faded but still legible. "If you see this cabin, leave immediately." The words sent a chill down my spine. I picked up the letter, my hands trembling as I read the dire warning left behind by the Frost family. It was a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within these walls, a plea for anyone who stumbled upon this cursed place to escape before it was too late. Before we could process the significance of the letter, the temperature in the room plummeted further, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The green light flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that danced menacingly across the walls. It was then that we heard the unmistakable sound of something moving behind us, a loud, metallic scraping that echoed through the empty halls. Turning around, we saw a figure emerge from the shadows, its form barely visible through the swirling green light. It was tall and imposing, its features obscured by darkness, but there was no mistaking the malevolent presence that radiated from it. The air grew heavy with an oppressive energy as the figure advanced towards us, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light that pierced through the darkness. "Who are you?" Jake demanded, his voice wavering with a mix of fear and defiance. The figure remained silent, its gaze fixed upon us with an intensity that made my heart race. Suddenly, it lunged forward, the cold biting into my skin as I instinctively raised my hands to shield myself. The impact was like nothing I had ever felt before, an invisible force that slammed into me, sending me crashing to the ground. The others were not so lucky. Sarah was thrown against a shattered window, the glass slicing through her skin as she let out a blood-curdling scream. Emily was dragged towards the figure, her screams echoing through the halls as the malevolent presence took hold of her. Jake attempted to fight back, but the force was overwhelming, his resistance futile against the unseen power that sought to claim us. In a desperate attempt to escape, I scrambled to my feet, the weight of the fear pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I turned and fled towards the entrance, the green light and the figure pursuing me relentlessly. The corridors seemed to stretch on endlessly, the castle itself morphing into a labyrinth designed to trap and torment those who dared to enter. As I ran, the sounds of the storm outside blended with the haunting cries and whispers from within, creating a symphony of terror that echoed through my mind. I stumbled through the grand halls, the letter's warning ringing in my ears, realizing too late that I had ignored the plea for safety. The castle was alive, its walls imbued with the sorrow and rage of the Frost family, forever binding their spirits to this icy tomb. Just as I thought all hope was lost, I burst through the front door, the storm outside now raging with an intensity that mirrored the chaos within the castle. I ran through the blinding snow, the green light fading behind me as I desperately searched for any sign of my team. The footprints led me in circles, the path back to the castle obscured by the relentless storm and the malevolent forces that sought to keep us trapped. Exhausted and on the brink of collapse, I finally reached the edge of the clearing, the storm beginning to abate as dawn broke over the horizon. Trembling and covered in blood from scratches and wounds sustained during the encounter, I collapsed to the ground, the memory of that night seared into my mind. I knew that Frostmore Castle held secrets too dark to uncover, its cursed legacy a haunting reminder of the thin veil between courage and foolishness. The following day, I contacted the authorities, detailing the horrifying events that had unfolded within the abandoned snow castle. A search party was dispatched, their journey mirroring the one I had taken, but what they found was no less chilling. They discovered my journal and the remnants of our equipment, but there was no sign of Jake, Sarah, or Emily, only the bloodied shoes and flashlights, frozen solid in the snow, with footprints leading towards the cursed castle and vanishing into thin air. The tragedy of that night left our community in mourning, the legend of Frostmore Castle gaining new layers of fear and sorrow. Some believed that the spirits of the Frost family had finally claimed the souls of those who dared to disturb their eternal winter vigil, while others whispered about a deeper, more malevolent force that dwelled within the icy walls. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of Frostmore Castle remains a haunting presence in my life. I often find myself staring into the snowy landscapes of Maine, the echoes of that night whispering through my thoughts. The name Frostmore Castle now carries a weight of tragedy and loss, a constant reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. We never spoke of the castle again, each of us grappling with the lingering fear and the loss of our friends. The nightmares, the guilt, and the unanswered questions consumed us, the legend of Frostmore Hollow a dark shadow that refused to lift. Our lives were forever changed, the tragedy binding us in a shared sorrow that no amount of time could heal. If you ever find yourself drawn to the remote wilderness of Maine, heed my warning, respect the legends, listen to the whispers carried by the wind, and remember that some places hold darkness too deep to uncover. For in the heart of Frostmore Castle lies a sorrowful curse, a reminder that courage and curiosity can sometimes lead to unimaginable horrors, and that some spirits are forever bound to their eternal vigil, waiting to claim those who dare to challenge their haunted realm. Story number 3. The Curse of Frostbite Lake. I never thought legends held any truth. Growing up in the bustling city of Detroit, the idea of restless spirits lurking in the wilderness seemed more like the stuff of campfire stories than reality. But that belief was irrevocably shattered one frigid winter night when my friends and I decided to challenge our courage by skating across Frostbite Lake in Michigan. It was the winter of 2015, and our group of 5, Jake, Emily, Sarah, Tom, and me, had always thrived on adrenaline-fueled adventures. When the opportunity arose to skate on the newly frozen Frostbite Lake, we saw it as the perfect test of bravery and friendship. The lake, nestled deep within the dense forests of northern Michigan, had a dark history that locals rarely spoke of, whispering tales of tragedy and loss that sent shivers down our spines. According to legend, decades ago, a young girl named Lily had tragically drowned in the icy waters during a brutal winter storm. Her family never recovered, and the village around the lake gradually dwindled until it was abandoned entirely. Some say her restless spirit still haunts the lake, dragging unsuspecting souls into the depths below. We laughed off these stories as mere superstition, determined to prove that fear was something we could conquer. The day before our expedition, the weather forecast predicted a heavy snowstorm, but we dismissed it as a minor inconvenience. Armed with our skates, flashlights, and a sense of invincibility, we set out under the pale light of dusk, the first snowflakes beginning to fall softly around us. As we approached the lake, the once tranquil surface was now a solid sheet of ice, glistening under the moonlight. The surrounding trees were heavy with snow, their branches bowing under the weight, creating a canopy that seemed to isolate us from the rest of the world. We set up our gear at the shoreline, the air crisp and biting, our breaths visible in the cold night air. "All right, team," Jake said, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his tone. "Let's do this." We laced up our skates and stepped onto the ice, the cold biting into our skin as we pushed off, gliding smoothly across the frozen expanse. The surface was firm beneath our feet, the only sounds the crunch of snow under our blades and the occasional call of a distant owl. As we ventured further out, the darkness of the night deepened, the only illumination coming from our flashlights and the stars overhead. The serenity of the lake was almost unnerving, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the trees. It was in these quiet moments that the legend of Lily began to haunt my thoughts, the stories of her restless spirit lingering in the back of my mind. We reached the center of the lake, a vast, open space surrounded by the dense forest. The snowstorm had intensified, the flakes swirling violently, reducing visibility to mere feet. It was then that we heard it, a faint, mournful wailing that seemed to emanate from beneath the ice itself. The sound was ethereal, a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. "Did you guys hear that?" Emily whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Probably just the wind," Jake replied, though his voice wavered slightly. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more distinct, as if someone, or something, was calling out to us from the depths below. Suddenly, the ice beneath us began to tremble, small cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. Panic set in as we realized that the legends might not be entirely unfounded. "Let's get back," Sarah urged, her voice shaking. "This doesn't feel right." But as we turned to skate back, the ice groaned ominously, the cracks widening rapidly. Before we could react, a massive jolt rocked the lake, sending us tumbling to the ground. The ice beneath us began to give way, the frozen surface shattering into jagged pieces that plunged us into darkness. I gasped for air, the frigid waters surrounding me as I struggled to find my bearings. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was a pair of piercing blue eyes staring down at me from beneath the ice, their gaze filled with sorrow and longing. When I awoke, I was shivering uncontrollably, the biting cold numbing my limbs. Blinking through the haze, I found myself alone, the ice around me smooth and unbroken. My friends were nowhere to be seen, their presence replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. Desperate to find them, I called out, my voice echoing through the empty expanse. "Jake! Emily! Sarah! Tom!" No response. Panic surged through me as I searched the surrounding area, the snowstorm now a silent witness to our disappearance. Hours passed, the storm showing no signs of abating, and the haunting memory of those blue eyes refused to fade. As dawn broke, the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a world transformed by its fury. Exhausted and terrified, I made my way back to the shoreline, my heart heavy with fear and sorrow. But when I reached the edge of the lake, there was no sign of my friends, no footprints, no skates, nothing to indicate their presence. Determined to find answers, I contacted the local authorities, describing our expedition and the terrifying events that had unfolded. A search party was dispatched, combing the lake and surrounding forest for any trace of us. Days turned into weeks, but there was no sign of Jake, Emily, Sarah, or Tom. The only evidence was a set of enormous, bloodied footprints leading from the shoreline into the depths of the forest, disappearing into the wilderness without a trace. The tragedy of that night left our community in mourning, the legend of Lily gaining new layers of fear and sorrow. Some believed that her spirit had finally claimed the souls of those who dared to disturb her eternal vigil, a warning to all who sought to challenge the legends of Frostbite Lake. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of that night remains a haunting presence in my life. I often find myself staring into the frozen landscapes of Michigan, the echoes of our screams and the sorrowful gaze of Lily's spirit lingering in my mind. The name Frostbite Lake now carries a weight of tragedy and loss, a constant reminder of the thin veil between courage and foolishness, love and fear. We never spoke of the lake again, each of us grappling with the lingering fear and the loss of our friends. The nightmares, the guilt, and the unanswered questions consumed us, the legend of Lily a dark shadow that refused to lift. Our lives were forever changed, the tragedy binding us in a shared sorrow that no amount of time could heal. One winter night, driven by a desperate need for closure, I returned to Frostbite Lake alone. The snow-covered landscape was serene, the darkness now familiar and foreboding. As I stood at the shoreline, memories of that night washed over me, the fear and the sorrow intertwining in a painful tapestry of regret. Determined to lay our spirits to rest, I approached the center of the lake, the site where the ice had given way and the tragedy had unfolded. Holding a candle in my hand, I whispered a prayer for my friends and for Lily, hoping that forgiveness and peace could bridge the gap between our haunted pasts. As the candlelight flickered against the frozen surface, a faint whisper carried by the wind reached my ears, a soft, sorrowful voice that echoed through the stillness. "Thank you," it whispered, and a sense of calm washed over me as the spirits of Lily and my friends found the peace they had long sought. The snow continued to fall gently, covering the lake in a blanket of white, the legend of Frostbite Lake now a story of sorrow and redemption. I left Michigan with a heavy heart but a sense of closure, the haunting presence of that tragic night finally laid to rest. If you ever find yourself drawn to the frozen expanses of Michigan, heed my warning, respect the legends, listen to the whispers carried by the wind, and remember that some places hold darkness too deep to uncover. For in the heart of Frostbite Lake lies a sorrowful curse, a reminder that courage and curiosity can sometimes lead to unimaginable horrors, and that some spirits are forever bound to their eternal vigil, waiting to claim those who dare to challenge their haunted realm. Story number 4. The Curse of Frostwood Hollow. I never believed in curses or ghost stories. Growing up in the heart of Chicago, surrounded by the relentless pace of city life, tales of haunted villages and restless spirits seemed like nothing more than exaggerated stories meant to entertain children on chilly winter nights. But that belief was irrevocably shattered the winter my wife, Laura, and I decided to move to Frostwood Hollow, a secluded area in rural Vermont, seeking a fresh start after the chaos of urban living took its toll on our marriage. Frostwood Hollow was a small, forgotten community nestled deep within the Green Mountains, its history shrouded in mystery and tragedy. The abandoned village nearby had been the site of a devastating pandemic in the mid-1800s, claiming the lives of nearly every inhabitant. Locals whispered that the souls of those who perished still lingered, bound to the land by unresolved sorrow and rage. Naturally, we dismissed these stories as nothing more than old wives' tales, remnants of a bygone era. Our new home was a charming wooden house on the outskirts of Frostwood Hollow, surrounded by dense forests and blanketed in pristine snow each winter. The house, though aged, exuded a rustic charm that immediately put us at ease. Laura and I were excited to embrace the tranquility and beauty of rural life, leaving behind the noise and stress of the city. The first few weeks were idyllic. We settled into a routine, exploring the surrounding woods, enjoying quiet evenings by the fireplace, and relishing the simplicity of our new life. Laura found solace in gardening, while I took up woodworking, crafting furniture from the abundant timber around us. Our son, Ethan, thrived in the open space, spending hours outside building snow forts and exploring the wilderness. But as the days turned into weeks and the nights grew longer and colder, an undercurrent of unease began to seep into our lives. It started subtly, soft knocking sounds at the front door in the dead of night, faint whispers carried by the wind that seemed to echo through the halls of our home. At first, we dismissed them as the natural sounds of the house settling or the creaks and groans of the old wood expanding and contracting with the temperature changes. One particularly frigid night, as a heavy snowstorm raged outside, the sounds became harder to ignore. The knocking was relentless, a steady rhythm that echoed through the silent house. Laura and I exchanged worried glances, the fear evident in our eyes. "It's just a storm," I reassured her, though my voice lacked conviction. But the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent. I decided to investigate, grabbing a flashlight and cautiously approaching the front door. As I opened it, the wind howled fiercely, snow whipping around me in a frenzied dance. The door swung shut behind me with a force that rattled the house, plunging me back into the dimly lit hallway. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the oppressive silence of the storm and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. Returning to the living room, I found Laura and Ethan huddled together, their faces pale with fear. "We need to stay calm," Laura whispered, pulling Ethan closer. "It's probably just the wind." But as I sat back down, the whispers began again, louder this time, speaking in an ancient language that sent chills down my spine. The words were unintelligible, but the sorrow and anger behind them were palpable, filling the room with an oppressive weight that made it difficult to breathe. Determined to find answers, I decided to delve into the history of Frostwood Hollow. Late one afternoon, I visited the local library, poring over old records and newspaper clippings. I discovered that the village had been nearly wiped out by a mysterious disease, with no known cause or cure. The few survivors had left, unable to bear the loss of their loved ones and the haunting memories of that winter. The abandoned buildings stood as silent testaments to their suffering, now reclaimed by nature and shrouded in legends of restless spirits. Armed with this new information, I returned home, a sense of dread settling over me. That night, as the storm intensified, the sounds of knocking and whispering grew louder, more desperate. I sat with Laura and Ethan, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events unfolding around us. Suddenly, Laura gasped, her eyes wide with terror. "I saw something," she whispered, clutching Ethan tightly. Through the window, there were shadowy figures standing outside, covered in snow, staring at us. I rushed to the window, the flashlight in my hand trembling as I peered out into the blizzard. There, in the midst of the swirling snow, stood several indistinct figures, their outlines barely visible through the thick white. Their presence was unsettling, a silent vigil that made my skin crawl. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the storm. The figures remained motionless, their hollow eyes fixed on our cabin with an intensity that felt almost supernatural. The night dragged on, the storm showing no signs of relenting. The knocking and whispering continued, growing more aggressive and persistent. Laura and I sat in the living room, our fear palpable as we tried to protect Ethan from the horrors outside. Around 2 a.m., the knocking turned into pounding, the force of it shaking the very foundation of our home. I grabbed my rifle, a habit from years of hunting, and approached the door once more, determined to uncover the source of the relentless noise. As I opened it, a gust of wind blew violently inside, extinguishing the fireplace and plunging us into darkness. Suddenly, the door slammed shut, locking itself with a force that left me breathless. The room filled with a chorus of whispers, now accompanied by mournful wails that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, pulling me towards the center of the room. "Don't let the door stay open," the voice intoned, the ancient language now clear in its message. "Leave now, or suffer the same fate." I struggled against the invisible force, my heart pounding in my chest as the whispers grew louder, their voices intertwining in a haunting melody of sorrow and despair. Laura and Ethan watched in horror as shadowy figures began to materialize around us, their forms taking on more defined, ghostly apparitions as the night wore on. Desperate to escape, I fought against the unseen grip, managing to break free and flee towards the back door. But as I reached for the handle, it refused to budge, the cabin itself resisting my attempts to leave. The apparitions closed in, their presence suffocating as they reached out with icy fingers, their hollow eyes burning into my soul. "Leave us alone," I cried out, tears streaming down my face as fear consumed me. "Please, just let us go." But the spirits were relentless, their torment unending as they drew closer, their whispers turning into anguished cries that echoed through the frozen night. In that moment, I realized the true extent of the curse that bound Frostwood Hollow, an eternal cycle of suffering and loss, trapping anyone who dared to disturb its haunted grounds. With a final surge of adrenaline, I grabbed Laura and Ethan, pulling them towards the only exit, the back door. The cabin shook violently as the spirits fought to keep us inside, their howls merging with the storm's fury in a symphony of chaos and despair. I forced the door open, the weight of the spirits pressing against us, and we fled into the blinding snowstorm, the sounds of their torment fading behind us as we ran for our lives. We stumbled through the deep snow, the storm now our only guide as we fled from the cursed cabin and the restless souls that sought to claim us. Hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion, our breaths visible in the frigid air as we navigated the treacherous terrain. The footprints we saw the night before now led us in circles, the path back to the village obscured by the relentless storm. When dawn finally broke, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a world transformed by its fury. We collapsed onto the snow-covered ground, shivering and battered, the memory of the night's horrors etched into our minds. Determined to survive, we made our way back to civilization, the cursed village now a distant memory overshadowed by our traumatic ordeal. The following day, we reported our disappearance and the terrifying events to the local authorities. They conducted a thorough search of Frostwood Hollow, but the village remained elusive, the snow-covered landscape offering no clues or signs of our presence. The only evidence of our ordeal was a set of enormous, bloodied footprints leading into the depths of the forest, tracks that disappeared without a trace, as if swallowed by the earth itself. In the weeks that followed, our lives were forever changed. Laura and I struggled with the lingering fear and trauma, our once happy marriage strained by the horrors we had endured. Ethan, too young to fully comprehend the darkness we had faced, clung to us with a fear that never seemed to fade. The legends of Frostwood Hollow took on a new, terrifying reality, the stories we had once dismissed now a haunting truth that we could never escape. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of Frostwood Hollow remains a ghostly presence in our lives. I often find myself staring into the snowy landscapes of Vermont, the echoes of that night whispering through my thoughts. The name Frostwood Hollow now holds a place of reverence and fear, a symbol of the thin veil between reality and the supernatural. We never spoke of the cabin again, each of us grappling with the lingering fear and the loss of our peace. The footprints that led us into the cursed village became a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurks in forgotten places, ready to ensnare those who dare to uncover its secrets. Laura and I moved away soon after, seeking solace in new surroundings, but the scars of that night remained etched into our souls. The nightmares, the fear of losing each other again, and the memories of Ethan's terrified eyes kept us from truly moving on. We tried therapy, support groups, anything to help us heal, but the trauma of Frostwood Hollow was a shadow that refused to lift. One cold winter night, years later, I received a call from an old friend who had heard about our story. He suggested we visit Frostwood Hollow again, to finally lay our fears to rest and perhaps find closure. Desperate for peace, Laura and I agreed, making the journey back to the haunted village that had torn our lives apart. As we approached the familiar landscape, the memory of our ordeal washed over me, a mix of dread and determination. The forest seemed quieter now, the snow untouched by human presence, but the air was thick with an unspoken tension. We found the spot where the cabin once stood, now just an empty clearing surrounded by dense trees and heavy snow. We sat in silence, the weight of our shared experience pressing in on us. Laura held my hand tightly, her touch a fragile anchor in the icy expanse. "Maybe if we acknowledge what happened, it won't haunt us anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. I nodded, pulling out the old letter I had kept all these years, a reminder of the warning that had come too late. "If you see this cabin, leave immediately," it had read. But we had ignored it, paying no heed to the dark prophecy that had sealed our fate. As midnight approached, the forest began to come alive with the sounds of the night. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the snowflakes danced in a chaotic frenzy. We felt a presence, a coldness that seemed to seep into our bones, and the sounds of footsteps echoed around us, the haunting whispers returning in a language lost to time. Laura gasped, her eyes wide with fear as she pointed to the edge of the clearing. "Look," she whispered, her voice trembling. Through the swirling snow, we saw them, shadowy figures standing silently at the boundary of the forest, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. Their hollow eyes seemed to pierce through us, their sorrowful gazes filled with unending pain. "We need to leave," I urged, pulling Laura towards the path that would take us away from Frostwood Hollow. But the footprints began to form around us, large and bloodied, leading deeper into the forest. The figures began to move, their steps synchronized with the pounding of our hearts, driving us forward into the darkness. Panic set in as we realized we were being guided back to the cursed village, the very place that had taken our family away from us. The whispers grew louder, their ancient language now clear in their desperate pleas. "Don't leave, don't leave," they chanted, their voices a haunting echo that resonated through the snowy landscape. Desperate to escape, we turned and ran, the footprints following us relentlessly, the shadowy figures closing in with each passing moment. The forest seemed to shift around us, the trees twisting into menacing shapes that blocked our path and disoriented our senses. The snow became thicker, making every step a struggle against the biting cold and the overwhelming fears that threatened to consume us. As we sprinted through the forest, the sounds of the spirits grew louder, their anguished cries filling the night with a palpable sense of dread. Laura tripped, falling to the ground and scraping her knee, but I grabbed her hand and pulled her to her feet, urging her to keep moving. "We have to make it out," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But the forest seemed endless, the path leading us in circles, trapping us in an eternal loop of suffering and loss. The spirits were relentless, their presence suffocating as they drew closer, their hollow eyes burning with an unholy light. The air grew colder, the snow piling up around us in a blinding white wall that obscured our vision and muffled our cries. In a final, desperate attempt to break free, I summoned every ounce of strength and fear, pushing Laura towards the edge of the forest. "Run, now!" I yelled, my voice barely audible over the storm's fury. But as she fled into the darkness, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, pulling me back into the depths of the cursed land. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the sorrowful faces of the lost villagers, their eyes filled with a haunting sadness that promised an eternity of torment. The snow enveloped me, the whispers fading into the silence of the night, leaving me alone in the heart of Frostwood Hollow, forever bound to the curse that had taken my family away. When the authorities finally found us, there was no sign of the cabin, no trace of our presence, only the bloodied footprints leading into the abyss of the forest, disappearing without a trace. We were found frozen in a secluded clearing, our bodies twisted in fear, the terror of Frostwood Hollow etched into our lifeless forms. No one dared to venture into the cursed village again, the legend of the lost family becoming a dark reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. Years have passed since that tragic winter, but the memory of Frostwood Hollow remains a ghostly presence in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies in forgotten places and the restless spirits that guard their eternal secrets. The name Frostwood Hollow now serves as a cautionary tale, a warning to those who dare to seek solace in the remote wilderness, unaware of the curses that await those who disturb the peace of the lost souls that linger in the shadows. If you ever find yourself yearning for a fresh start in the quiet corners of Vermont, heed my warning, respect the legends, listen to the whispers carried by the wind, and remember that some places hold secrets too dark to uncover. For in the heart of Frostwood Hollow lies a sorrowful curse, ready to claim those who dare to challenge its eternal vigil, leaving nothing but bloodied footprints and lost souls in its wake. Story number 5. The Snow Wanderer of Denali. I never believed in the old tales that the people of Alaska whispered around their fires. Growing up in the bustling heart of Anchorage, surrounded by the relentless pace of city life, stories of mysterious creatures roaming the vast wilderness seemed like nothing more than exaggerated campfire tales meant to entertain tourists and keep children from straying too far. But that belief was irrevocably shattered one fateful winter night when I ventured into the heart of Denali National Park. My name is Ethan Miller, and I've always been an avid hunter. The solitude of the Alaskan wilderness was something I cherished, a stark contrast to the crowded streets and constant noise I had grown accustomed to. When I heard about a secluded area deep within Denali, rumored to offer untouched game and unparalleled peace, I knew I had to explore it. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. The snow-covered landscape was breathtaking, the silence profound except for the occasional call of a distant eagle or the crunch of my boots on the fresh powder. I set up camp in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the majestic peaks of the Alaska Range. The nights were cold but serene, the sky a canvas of stars reflected in the frozen lakes below. On the third night, as a fierce snowstorm began to roll in, I decided to secure my gear and prepare for the worst. The wind howled through the trees, and the temperature plummeted rapidly. As I sat by my tent, reviewing my maps and notes, a sense of unease settled over me. It wasn't the storm, it was something else, something primal and unsettling. Just past midnight, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thudding coming from the roof of my tent. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, the sound growing louder and more deliberate. It wasn't the wind, nor was it an animal seeking shelter. It felt intelligent. Grabbing my flashlight and a sturdy hunting knife, I cautiously approached the tent. Peering inside, I saw nothing but the swirling snow and the faint glow of my lantern. Shaking off the fear, I decided to check the perimeter, ensuring that no animals had found their way into my camp. As I walked along the edge of my campsite, the storm intensifying around me, I noticed something strange. The snow beneath my boots had been disturbed. Large, heavy footprints led away from my tent and disappeared into the dense forest. They were unlike any animal tracks I had ever seen, massive, with elongated toes and deep impressions that suggested something far larger and more menacing than a bear. My mind raced with possibilities. Had a predator found its way into my camp, or was there something more sinister at play? I followed the trail, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing the path into the heart of the storm. The footprints led me deeper into the forest, the trees growing thicker and the snow piling higher. Every step was a battle against the biting cold and the howling wind, but something pushed me forward, an inexplicable urge to uncover the truth. Hours seemed to pass as I navigated the treacherous terrain, the storm showing no signs of relenting. Just as exhaustion began to overtake me, I stumbled upon a clearing illuminated by the faint glow of moonlight breaking through the storm clouds. In the center stood a figure, a hulking silhouette against the swirling snow, its form obscured by shadows but unmistakably humanoid. As I approached, the figure became clearer, revealing a creature that defied all logic and reason. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its body a grotesque amalgamation of man and beast. Thick, matted fur covered its torso, blending seamlessly into powerful limbs ending in sharp claws. Its face was a horrifying blend of human and animal features, with hollow, piercing eyes that seemed to burn with an otherworldly intelligence. The creature's presence was overwhelming, a palpable sense of malice emanating from its very being. Before I could react, it lunged at me with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air. I swung my knife, managing to deflect its first attack, but the sheer force behind its movements sent me sprawling to the ground. The creature towered over me, its eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "You shouldn't have come here," it growled, its voice a guttural blend of human and animal sounds. "This is our land." I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline fueling my movements as I backed away, desperately searching for an escape route. The creature advanced, each step shaking the ground beneath us. The storm raged around us, the snow blinding and disorienting, making it nearly impossible to keep my bearings. In a moment of sheer panic, I turned and ran, the creature's heavy footsteps pounding behind me. The footprints that had led me here were now behind me, but the creature pursued relentlessly, its presence a constant, terrifying shadow in the blizzard. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I navigated the treacherous landscape, the storm and the creature making it feel like I was trapped in a nightmare. Just as I thought I couldn't run any further, I burst into another clearing, the snow shifting to reveal a small, frozen lake. Exhausted and desperate, I made a final push towards the edge, the creature close behind me. With one last surge of energy, I dove into the icy water, the freezing cold searing my skin as I struggled to stay afloat. The creature halted at the edge of the lake, its breath visible in the frigid air as it stared down at me. I thrashed in the water, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion, until finally, I managed to pull myself out and climb onto the ice, shivering uncontrollably. Gasping for breath, I looked back to see the creature standing on the opposite shore, its eyes following my every move. Slowly, it began to fade into the darkness, the storm gradually subsiding as dawn broke over the horizon. I watched in disbelief as the last remnants of the creature disappeared, leaving behind only the silence of the snow-covered wilderness. Exhausted and numb, I made my way back to my tent, the experience leaving me shaken to my core. The next morning, I found my tent untouched, the storm having passed without further incident. When I reported my disappearance and the horrifying encounter to the authorities, they conducted a thorough search of the area but found no trace of me or the mysterious creature, only the enormous footprints leading deep into the forest, fading into the untouched snow. I returned to Anchorage with a newfound respect for the old legends, the memory of that night forever etched into my mind. The story of the Snow Wanderer became a haunting reminder that some places hold secrets too dark to uncover and that the wilderness is not always a sanctuary of peace but can harbor unimaginable horrors. Years later, I still find myself staring into the snowy landscapes of Alaska, the echoes of that night whispering through my thoughts. The name Snow Wanderer now holds a place of reverence and fear, a symbol of the thin veil between the natural and the supernatural. I share my story with a sense of caution, hoping to warn others of the dangers that lie hidden in the heart of the wild. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote wilderness of Alaska, heed my warning, respect the legends, listen to the whispers carried by the wind, and remember that in the heart of the storm lies a darkness that watches and waits, ready to claim those who dare to challenge its eternal vigil. For in the frozen silence of the mountains, the eyes of the lost still watch, their presence a chilling reminder that some curses are too powerful to escape and some lands are best left undisturbed. Story number 6. The Curse of Snow Hill Ridge. I never believed in old legends or ghost stories. Growing up in Denver, surrounded by modern conveniences and the bustling city life, tales of cursed hills and restless spirits seemed like nothing more than exaggerated stories meant to thrill children on winter nights. But that belief was irrevocably shattered one bitterly cold winter when my friends and I decided to challenge the legends surrounding Snow Hill Ridge in Colorado. My name is Mark Thompson, and I've always been an avid mountaineer. The allure of untouched peaks and the thrill of conquering nature's formidable challenges drew me to the mountains more than anything else. When a group of my closest friends, Jake, Sarah, Emily, and Tom, proposed a weekend camping trip to Snow Hill Ridge, I was all in. We were eager to experience the serenity and raw beauty that only such remote locations could offer. Snow Hill Ridge had a notorious reputation among local climbers. The legend spoke of a small village that had been buried under an avalanche centuries ago, its inhabitants lost to the unforgiving mountain. They said that on certain nights, the souls of those who perished would rise from the snow, their cries echoing through the peaks, forever trapped in a state of anguish and despair. Naturally, we dismissed these stories as mere folklore, but the allure of the untouched wilderness was too strong to resist. We arrived at the base of Snow Hill Ridge on a frigid Friday afternoon. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, the sun reflecting off the pristine snow like scattered diamonds. Our gear was loaded into a sturdy SUV, and we began the ascent, the crunch of our boots against the snow creating a rhythmic soundtrack to our adventure. The higher we climbed, the more isolated we felt, the world below shrinking into a distant memory. By late afternoon, we reached a flat area near the summit where we decided to set up our camp. The cabin we found was small and unassuming, a relic from a bygone era, its wooden exterior weathered by time and the elements. It stood alone amidst the vast expanse of snow-covered pines, the windows dark and lifeless. Despite its abandoned appearance, we felt an inexplicable sense of calm as we settled in for the night. As dusk turned to night, the temperature plummeted, and the first flakes of snow began to fall, quickly accumulating into a thick blanket that obscured the landscape. We built a roaring fire in the stone fireplace, the warmth a welcome contrast to the biting cold outside. Laughter and conversation filled the cabin, the stories we shared a testament to our camaraderie and shared love for the mountains. But as midnight approached, a heavy silence descended upon us, broken only by the howling wind and the soft crackle of the fire. It was then that we heard it, a faint, mournful wailing echoing from below the ridge. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the sound persisted, growing louder and more distinct with each passing minute. Probably just a creaky tree or something, Jake suggested, trying to brush off the unease that had settled over us. But Sarah wasn't so sure. I've heard those stories. Maybe it's just the wind, but it feels different. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening and the fire's warmth becoming inadequate against the chill that permeated the cabin. Emily, our youngest and most sensitive member, clung to Tom's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Maybe we should check it out," Tom proposed, ever the brave one. "See if there's something wrong." Reluctantly, I nodded. "Yeah, let's go see what's going on." We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously made our way outside, the snow crunching under our boots. The wailing had transformed into a series of desperate screams, reverberating through the mountains and sending shivers down our spines. The footprints we had seen earlier in the snow seemed to guide us towards the heart of the ridge, leading us deeper into the darkness. As we moved forward, the howling grew louder, the sounds blending into a cacophony of pain and sorrow. Suddenly, a bright flash of light illuminated the area ahead, and we saw them, ghostly apparitions rising from the snow, their translucent forms shimmering in the moonlight. Their eyes, hollow and filled with anguish, locked onto us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Abigail," Emily whispered, clutching Tom's arm tightly. "It's her." Before we could react, the apparitions lunged towards us, their ethereal forms passing through the cabin's walls as if they were mere shadows. The air around us grew thick with sorrow and rage, the spirits' cries blending into a single, overwhelming force that threatened to consume us. "We need to get back," Jake shouted, pulling me towards the cabin. But as we turned to flee, the snow began to swirl violently around us, the wind howling like the spirits themselves. The path back seemed to stretch endlessly, the footprints leading us in circles, trapping us in a never-ending loop. Panic set in as we realized we were being hunted, our every move shadowed by the restless souls of the lost villagers. In a desperate attempt to escape, I grabbed Emily and ran towards the cabin, the other two following close behind. The apparitions were relentless, their cries growing louder, their presence more menacing. Just as we reached the cabin's door, a powerful gust of wind slammed it shut, the impact sending us sprawling to the ground. Terrified, we scrambled to our feet, the apparitions closing in around us. The cabin seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, the walls shimmering with the sorrow and pain of the lost souls trapped within. Desperate, I reached for my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, only the oppressive silence of the mountains responding to our plight. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the apparitions surrounding us, their hollow eyes fixed on us with unrelenting intent. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, pulling me towards the center of the cabin. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free, but the grip only tightened, dragging me closer to the spirit's domain. Suddenly, the storm outside intensified, the snow swirling into a blinding white fury that seemed to erase everything in its path. The cabin shook violently, the walls cracking under the pressure of the spirit's torment. In a final, desperate bid for escape, I managed to pull free, sprinting towards the door as the apparitions screamed in unison, their voices echoing through the cabin like a chorus of lost souls. I reached the door and flung it open, the howling wind cutting through me like icy blades. I ran as fast as I could, the footprints leading me deeper into the ridge, the apparitions chasing me with an unholy determination. The path seemed to twist and turn, leading me into the heart of the mountain, the snow piling up behind me in a blinding white wall. Just as my legs threatened to give out, I saw a faint light up ahead, a trail marker indicating the way back. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed forward, the apparitions closing in behind me, their cries growing louder with each step. As I reached the marker, the storm began to abate, the snow slowing to a gentle fall as dawn broke over the ridge. Gasping for breath, I collapsed onto the ground, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the trees and dispelling the darkness that had held me captive. Looking back, the footprints had vanished, replaced by an empty expanse of snow and silence. The cabin was nowhere to be seen, as if it had never existed, a ghostly memory erased by the morning light. I staggered back to our campsite, finding Jake, Sarah, and Emily huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. We didn't speak, the horrors of the night too terrifying to articulate. As the sun climbed higher, we packed our gear and made our way back down the ridge, the memory of those restless spirits etched into our minds forever. When we finally reached civilization, the townsfolk listened to our story with a mix of skepticism and concern. They spoke of old legends and warned us to stay away from Snow Hill Ridge, but we knew what we had experienced was no mere ghost story. The footprints leading us in circles, the apparitions that haunted our every step, they were real, a testament to the lingering curse of the lost village. In the weeks that followed, we struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Ethan, our youngest, was plagued by nightmares, reliving the cries of the spirits and the oppressive darkness of the cabin. Karen and I found ourselves unable to sleep, the fear of encountering those restless souls ever present in our minds. The bonds of our friendship were strained, the trauma of that night leaving scars that time could never fully heal. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, but the memory of Snow Hill Ridge remains a ghostly presence in my life. I often find myself staring into the snowy landscapes of Colorado, the echoes of that night whispering through the winds. The name Abigail still lingers in my thoughts, a name that has become synonymous with the curse that bound the lost villagers to their eternal torment. The cabin remains a ghostly legend, a cautionary tale whispered among climbers and adventurers alike. Some say it's a portal to another realm, others believe it's the domain of vengeful spirits seeking to trap unsuspecting souls. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain, Snow Hill Ridge holds secrets too dark to uncover, its cursed legacy waiting to ensnare those who dare to challenge its haunted dominion. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote wilderness of the Smoky Mountains in Colorado, heed my warning, respect the legends, listen to the whispers carried by the wind, and remember that some places are better left untouched. For in the heart of the snow-covered ridge lies a darkness that watches and waits, ready to claim those who dare to uncover its eternal secrets. And above all, never let your guard down, for the spirits of the lost are always watching, their eyes burning with a sorrowful rage that can consume your very soul. Story number 7. The Curse of the Blizzard Ghosts. I never believed the old stories about the Dakotas. Growing up in Bismarck, surrounded by stories of hardworking pioneers and the resilience of small-town life, tales of ghostly storms and cursed blizzards seemed like little more than the stuff of campfire myths. But that belief was shattered one bitterly cold winter when I found myself in the tiny, long-abandoned town of Winter Haven, a place forever marked by the tragic legend of the blizzard ghosts. My name is Sam Harker, and I work as a freelance journalist. I've made it my life's work to document forgotten places and the stories behind them. When I first heard about Winter Haven, I was immediately intrigued. The town, nestled in the remote plains of North Dakota, had been buried under a historic blizzard decades ago. Survivors were few, and those who escaped spoke of haunting encounters during the storm, ghostly figures wandering through the snow, whispering their names, and cries of lost children echoing in the freezing winds. The legend claimed that the storm had come as a punishment, a manifestation of the dead, angry that the townspeople ignored the warnings. It was said that those who died that night still roamed the ruins, calling out to anyone who dared to approach. Despite the warnings from locals, I decided to investigate. I was drawn to the mystery of Winter Haven, eager to uncover the truth behind the ghost stories. Armed with my camera, recorder, and enough supplies to last a week, I set out for the ruins of the lost town. The drive to Winter Haven was harrowing. The further I ventured from civilization, the more desolate the landscape became. The road stretched endlessly, flanked by snow-covered fields and leafless trees. The temperature dropped steadily, the frigid air cutting through my coat despite the car's heater. As I approached the outskirts of the abandoned town, the first snowflakes began to fall, carried by a wind that seemed to whisper warnings in my ear. I parked at the edge of what had once been Main Street. The buildings were skeletal remains, they were warped and splintered by decades of harsh weather. The snow blanketed everything, erasing the boundaries between streets and structures. The town was eerily silent, save for the occasional groan of wind weaving through the ruins. I set up camp in what had once been the town's general store, its walls offering some protection from the worsening storm. As night fell, the snow intensified, and the temperature plummeted. The wind howled like a mournful banshee, and the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, but the whispers grew more distinct, more human. They seemed to come from every direction, wrapping around me like the icy gusts outside. Sam. My name carried on the wind, soft yet chilling. My heart raced as I clutched my flashlight, scanning the room. The store was empty save for my belongings. I stepped outside, the snow swirling in a chaotic frenzy. The whispers continued, louder now, joined by faint cries of children. Sam. Come, the voice was distant yet unmistakable, pulling me deeper into the ruins of Winter Haven. Against my better judgment, I followed, my boots crunching through the snow. As I wandered the ghostly streets, I saw them, shadowy figures moving through the storm. They were indistinct, their forms shifting like smoke caught in the wind. I froze, fear gripping me as one turned toward me. Its eyes, hollow and glowing faintly, locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sadness wash over me. Why are you here? The voice was not a question but an accusation, resonating in my mind rather than my ears. The figure vanished into the storm, leaving me shaken and disoriented. I stumbled back to the general store, my breath visible in the freezing air. The whispers grew louder as I bolted the door behind me, the sound now accompanied by soft knocking, first at the front door, then at the boarded-up windows. The knocks were deliberate, rhythmic, like someone, or something, was testing the barriers. Let us in, the voice was childlike, plaintive. It's so cold, please help us. My chest tightened as I pressed my back against the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. The knocking became more insistent, the voices multiplying, overlapping in a haunting chorus. Sam. Why did you leave us? I grabbed my recorder, desperate to document the phenomenon. My voice trembled as I spoke. This is Sam Harker. I'm in Winter Haven, North Dakota. It's real. The voices, the figures, they're real. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that was even more unsettling. Then came the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and coming from inside the store. My blood ran cold as I turned, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. Standing in the corner was a figure, its face obscured by shadows. Its body was thin, skeletal, draped in tattered clothing frozen with frost. Why are you here? It asked again, its voice hollow and devoid of emotion. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The figure stepped closer, its presence filling the room with an unbearable chill. The windows frosted over, the temperature dropping to a level that made it hard to breathe. The figure raised a hand, pointing toward me. You brought them with you. Before I could process its words, the door burst open, the storm roaring into the room like a living entity. Snow and ice swirled around me, and the whispers returned, deafening in their intensity. Sam. Come with us. The figures surrounded me, their hollow eyes glowing in the darkness. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the faint green glow of their eyes and the overwhelming sensation of being pulled into the storm. When I woke, it was morning. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine layer of snow over the ruins. My gear was scattered, my recorder frozen and unresponsive. I stumbled outside, the sunlight glaring off the snow. The town was silent once more, but something was different. Footprints surrounded me, leading in all directions but ending abruptly as if the people who made them had simply vanished. My name was scrawled in the snow, repeated over and over, the letters distorted by the wind. My car was gone, and the road leading back to civilization was buried under feet of snow. I was alone. Weeks later, a search party found me wandering the plains, frostbitten and incoherent. They said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. The memories of Winter Haven haunted me, the voices and figures replaying in my mind like a broken record. My story was dismissed as the hallucinations of a man on the brink of hypothermia, but I know the truth. Winter Haven is cursed. The souls of those lost in the blizzard are trapped there, forever wandering the frozen ruins, searching for warmth, for answers, for revenge. And now, a part of me is trapped with them, a fragment of my soul left behind in the snow. If you ever find yourself in the Dakotas during winter, heed my warning: when the storm comes, stay inside. Ignore the knocking, the cries, the whispers. No matter how desperate they sound, do not open the door. For the blizzard ghosts are always watching, waiting to claim those who dare to challenge the storm.